Now, as far as the playoff goes, on this note, okay, keep that in mind. You see how everybody is treating the Big 12 when it comes to TV ratings. And I just said the most viral tweet of the week was about, oh, well, if South Florida and Georgia Tech were to play in a playoff game, you could easily replace, if South Florida and Texas Tech were to play in a playoff game, no one's going to want to watch it. Like, that's the general attitude from folks. You can imagine that nobody is really wanting to see a second Big 12 team in the college football playoff. And unfortunately, I think the masses may get their wish on that based on the way things are setting up right now. And I did not talk enough about that earlier this week. First of all, I would love to watch South Florida and Georgia Tech. I would love to watch South Florida and Texas Tech. Whatever that matchup is going to be, Alex Golish is a great story. What he is doing at USF. This is where I need my guy Justin. I think he changed his name, but formerly Justin. Everybody knows him if you've been around here for a while. Need him to defend his boys there against that ridiculous tweet from earlier this week. But look, Texas Tech being unbeaten, that was definitely the best opportunity that the Big 12 had for an at-large bid. What we're talking about here is an at-large bid. And this week even, this was some of the talk from Big 12 folks I was talking to at Media Days in Kansas City. They were hyper aware of David Pollack, I believe it was, who threw out a playoff projection that didn't even include a Big 12 team. Like, I guess we're heading into that part of the season now. It happened some last year where there was a brief moment in time where it was, not only is Boise ahead of the Big 12 conference champion, which they did wind up in front of Arizona State, but we're also going to start saying, hey, there might be Army or Tulane that could also finish in front of the Big 12, which would leave the Big 12 completely out of the playoff. Apparently we are, it's like a you are here map at the mall. You are here at this point in the season where people are going to start to say, hey, there may be another conference champion. There may be 4 conference champions. Or wait, what would that be? 5? The Big 12 might get left out by not being one of the highest ranked conference champions, which, like, come on, man. That elicits such a heavy eye roll from me. But Texas Tech losing is part of what brings people there because they're like, well, Texas Tech was the team that was supposed to be a juggernaut and go undefeated. And objectively for the Big 12, it would have been better had Texas Tech continued to win games. No doubt about that. We don't know how exactly the College Football Playoff Selection Committee is going to act, but if they act anyway like the AP poll, which they typically do, we've got a good clue as to what's going to happen to Big 12 teams as they lose, if they lose the rest of the year. Texas Tech went from 7-14 for a 4-point loss on the road to the defending Big 12 champions while they played with their backup quarterback. Okay. That is not the same treatment that Alabama would get. That is not the same treatment that Oregon would get. That is not the same treatment that Ohio State would get. But yet, it's what happens to Texas Tech. There is not a very healthy amount of respect for the Big 12, and so that happens. So anytime there's a loss, you just plummet. Texas Tech is below 2-loss Notre Dame. BYU, who is unbeaten in the Big 12, is just barely ahead. They are 1 spot ahead of 2-loss Notre Dame. So that tells you about the fight that the Big 12 is going to be up against when it comes to playoff at-large bids here. That is extremely unfortunate. What you wanted to happen was Texas Tech. If Texas Tech's unbeaten, your dream scenario to get multiple teams in. I don't know if this is like your dream scenario overall because some of it would depend on seeding. If you're wanting to see like Texas Tech or whoever like win playoff games, which is the ultimate goal, right? Like part of the reason that you want multiple teams in is to have a better chance, like more opportunities to win playoff games. So if the argument is you want to win playoff games, maybe the best thing is just get the most advantageous draw, best seed. But if you're looking just to get multiple teams in, Texas Tech winning out, being unbeaten, and having a redo basically of the 2022 Big 12 championship game where unbeaten TCU loses a nail-biter, goal line stand, game-winning field goal, overtime, total nail-biter to somebody else. That was your best case to get 2 teams in. Because then if Tech is 12-1 at that point, and they're sitting there, but you can't at that point that you may not be able to drop them out of the top 12. It starts to get really tough if you're the committee dropping them out of the top 12. Now everybody's got a loss, and I guess you can say, hey, well, BYU is still unbeaten. They definitely are, but the problem that BYU has versus Texas Tech, if you're going to play out that scenario with the Cougars, is that, one, we saw how BYU was treated last year. Like, we already got the evidence of how that brand would be treated by everybody nationally last season. Answer, not well. Like, here's a hint. It's not well. BYU had an objectively better resume than Miami. They had a better win than Miami, and it was against a team in Miami's own conference that made the playoff in SMU, and it was on the road. And it didn't matter. It didn't matter. BYU was not considered, and Miami was one of the last teams out where they were very heavily considered for that playoff spot. So I just, considering not very optimistic. Again, BYU's unbeaten. Notre Dame has 2 losses. BYU's 1 spot ahead of them in the poll right now. So I don't think you're going to get much love, much preferential treatment there. Even if, BYU goes through unbeaten here, which would require beating Texas Tech and Iowa State and TCU. What's the other one left? Is Houston. I mean, it's a tough schedule that BYU has the rest of the way. And if they did that, made it all the way there, and then lost to whoever it would be, Arizona State, perhaps Texas Tech, in the Big 12 championship game in a very close game in overtime, I still don't have a whole lot of faith that would work out the way that you want it to. And the reality is, I mean, look, all respect in the world to what BYU is doing right now. I mean, 1,000%. That team is legitimately good. Every time you count them out, they find a way to win. I total transparency, had predicted them to lose to Utah. I thought they would lose a close game. And not only did they win, I mean, that was really more like a 10 to 17 point win. You had kind of a throwaway touchdown by Utah at the end of the game. They won emphatically, but I don't expect them to get through that schedule unscathed. That does feel too difficult for me. I would imagine that there's a loss or two. Maybe it winds up in a similar spot to what it was last season for that team. BYU has talked all week this week about, hey, we can't let the Utah game turn into back-to-back losses, which it did last year. We can't like bask in this so much that we lose back-to-back games. But this week is tough. I mean, situationally, everything favors Iowa State. Iowa State's rested coming off of a bye. BYU has to come down from a monster win that they just had last week. And the game is in Ames, which is obviously a very, very tough atmosphere. Situationally, everything would point toward like, hey, Iowa State's the pick. And that's why, Iowa State's a 2.5 point favorite. So BYU's literally an underdog this week. Makes it feel like it's going to be a tough road to climb to get multiple teams into the playoff this year. Brett Yormark talked at Media Days in Kansas City this week about, still pushing for that, still believing in that. He thinks the league should get multiple teams in. Brett Yormark needs to be saying that. Brett Yormark also did kind of slip up, and in the response, if you watch the video on Tuesday, his response to my question about the reported plan that's out there from the Big Ten, which would give everybody equal bids, Big Ten, SEC, ACC, Big 12 at 3 or 4. When I asked him about that, he did say, like, yeah, I'm on board for that. But then in his response, he was like, look, I just want the right teams to be there, yada, yada, yada. And like he said last year, that's what we got. And I would have said, hey, Brett, I don't know that that's true, my friend. BYU, I think, should have absolutely been in the conversation to be in the playoff. I wouldn't pound the table and say it's a total travesty if they didn't make it. But the fact that they weren't even considered, I might have tweaked that answer a bit to be like, hey, let's pound the table a little bit more for the Big 12 right now. Anyway, we'll see if Yormark has any tricks up his sleeve, if the Big 12 has any marketing tricks up its sleeve, messaging tricks up its sleeve to try and make an impact. They do a good job with some of that stuff, like the tweet that we saw at Brent Venables. I got to learn a little bit of the backstory behind that this week, which was great. And the Big 12 has a real keen knack for doing some things like that. So I don't know. Maybe something like that can make a little bit of a difference. Maybe public perception will change. Maybe it's just going to be such a crazy year, right? I mean, this has already been, I think, the wildest college football year since 2007. Maybe it will just be such a crazy year that something happens that we can't foresee, and this will all work out. Maybe BYU does rip it off undefeated and has a chance to pull this off. But right now, I do think the scenario is it's pretty tough.